the New World Order, and the conspiracy to cover it up. The shadow government's agenda in keeping us asleep. The injustice, catastrophe, and the global chaos are all indications that we are living in a period of time known as the end of days. Are you looking for answers? They are out there, and together we will find them as we navigate through End Times Now with Bree.
How's it going, guys? Welcome to another episode of End Times Now with Bree. I am Bree. It's so nice to meet you. If you didn't catch the last episode, be sure to go and listen to it because I break down the evils of the unseen realm and who some of the players are. It gets kind of creepy, and how it affects us today. Although I'm going to give you a little trigger warning if you're a Disney fan. It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Just don't be mad at me. And there's therapy for things like that. So just, it's all good. Just be cool. You can find me on Facebook if you want to get in touch. Facebook, YouTube, X, Twitter, whatever you want to call that. And then be sure to listen to us on Spreaker. And there's some others out there too. But the bottom line, guys, is go find me. End Times Now with Bree. Soon I'd like to do some videos, but you guys, I'm a rookie. Seriously, if you can't tell. Just bear with me, okay? So the question today is, what do angels, aliens, UFOs, and the Shroud of Turin have in common? I know it's surprising, but there is a connection. And in my opinion, it opens up a world of possibilities regarding what we think we know. And it just gives a whole new perspective of the unseen realm. And all of the subjects that I just listed before. So before we start, though, I want you guys to know that anything that I offer, if it's my opinion, I'm going to let you know it's my opinion. Otherwise, I'm getting it from scientific sources, and I do my best to cite those sources or firsthand accounts. From people who, have firsthand accounts in their experiences, so on and so forth. But the main thing that I want you guys to know is that I'm not fabricating anything here. It's just, I'm giving it to you the way that it's been given to me, and I'm going to let you know if it's my own opinion. So, yeah. Of course, if anybody has anything to offer here, or if anyone has a story they'd like to tell or an idea for an episode, please reach out to me at endtimesnowwithbree@protonmail.com. And without further ado, let's start with my favorite nightmare, and that would be aliens. They just scare the crap out of me. Anyway, if you've listened to any of the podcasts that I did with Investigate Earth with Chad and Sherry, then my position on aliens is that I believe they're really fallen angels. But there's a very good reason why I believe that. And it's because when we look at how most people view aliens in the conventional manner, we can go to the Bible and see that there really isn't much difference. It's just, when you're talking to someone who is not familiar with the Bible and you say, what do you think an alien is? We get a conventional answer, but if you go, of grays or reptilians or what have you, but if you go and you look at what the Bible says, you see that they're very similar. So that's why I believe that. And the same goes with the technology. For example, when you look at Ezekiel's vision of the wheel, it seems to resemble a UFO. And when we speak to the identity of what an alien is, again, we have the Greys and the Reptilians and the Nordics, which to me, a Nordic would actually symbolize, I don't know, maybe something where in the Bible, for instance, the men that came to visit Abraham and to tell Abraham about how Sarah was going to have a baby. and she was going to have Isaac. They were men. They were tall. They were just like normal guys. So I don't know. I don't know. But if you ask most people, they really don't know what angels look like, or demons for that matter. But that's a whole nother podcast. It's only obvious, though, at that point, if we're going to get that information, what do angels look like? What are some of their characteristics? We should probably go to the source of which they've been written about, right? And that would be the Bible. But I can tell you what they're not. They're definitely not fat little babies with wings carrying bows and arrows. They're definitely not that. They can shapeshift. Hebrews chapter 13, verse 2 says that we should treat everyone with hospitality, as we could be enacting such things without knowing that they're angels. So we know that they can turn into something other than what they were created as, right? It's really weird. But at that point too, I think it's only safe to assume that if good angels have this capability of shapeshifting, then bad ones do as well, right? I'm sure that, if you've done any sort of research into the alien world, you've seen that, the common generality of reptilians is that they shapeshift, right? So we see definitely several cases in the Bible when an angel comes as a man, but that's not what they were created to look like. And also I'll add that it's never a female. If an angel comes, it's never a female. It's always a dude, or something that looks like a dude. The Bible does say that we have guardian angels, and they actually fight for us, which I thought was pretty cool. Apparently, as well, our prayers of faith is what keeps the gates of hell at bay. So prayers of faith are, if there's fallen angels that are hanging out in hell, it's the prayers of the faithful that keep them from advancing, which is interesting. Daniel chapters 9 and 10 gives a really decent glimpse into this. And also we're able to see who the principalities of Ephesians chapter 6, verse 11 and 12 are. That verse states that we wrestle not against flesh and blood. So the only other option would be spirits, right? And it says we wrestle against principalities and rulers of darkness and high places. Okay. And so when you break these words down into the Greek, we get a really good glimpse into the fact that the unseen realm is much more than what we think it is. For instance, principalities is in reference to an entire realm, dominion, nation, region, or state in which a prince rules. Okay, an invisible prince, okay, rules this particular area. So keep that in mind, because you're going to see a glimpse of that a little bit later. But also in that verse, the word ruler in the Bible only refers to Satan and his club, and that the high places are only in the heavenly realm. The word is eperanius, and it's existing in heaven, things that take place in heaven, the heavenly regions, the lower heavens of the stars, the heavens of the clouds. You get the point, right? But I really found that to be interesting, because it just gives more of a perspective on the fact that it's not just angels and demons. There's more complexity to it, and that not just, people in the government who are being influenced by these things, which I talked about in the last episode. But we can see that every person in an authoritative position has an influence that they probably don't even realize is there and is playing out in the unseen realm. In fact, this is exactly what happened with Daniel. He sees something pretty crazy. So the story is Daniel, he's chilling by the river, probably having some milk and cookies or something. That's what I would be doing. And he's just sitting there doing his Bible study for the day and comes across Jeremiah 29. He does the math and quickly recognizes that the prophecy of Jeremiah 29 is about to come to pass, and things are going to get pretty rough. Okay, the Israelites are going to go into captivity to Nebuchadnezzar, and it's going to get rough. So he starts to pray and fast, and all of a sudden he's visited by the angel Gabriel, who gives him what is known as the prophecy of 70 weeks. Now, this prophecy in its own right deserves an episode of its own because it's complicated, but fascinating. And for the sake of time, I'll just break it down mathematically. I'll break it down and give you the math in the years, but you need to understand that it's broken down to the day of when Jesus would enter Jerusalem as king, and it foretells of his death as well as what happens in the very last week, i.e. the tribulation. Okay. So although I'm not going to break it down in the different weeks for you, I will certainly lay out the amount of time and how it comes together. But just a side note here, if you wanted to do a study on this on your own, these are prophetic weeks, not like a week that we think of, 7 days. And the Bible does clarify this, but these weeks are actually equal to 7 years. So 1 week is 7 years. Each day is a year. And a prophetic year is 360 days, not 365 days. So again, for the sake of time, the total comes out to be 490 years in total. But they're not consecutive weeks, and every week has technically passed, except for the last week. Okay, so the last 7 years. I'm going to say too that all of these things in this prophecy were given in detail, and it lines up perfectly with what the histories record and archaeology. Okay, and if you want to check out this a little more, there was a man named Sir Anderson Doyle. He was the head of Scotland Yard, and he wrote a book called The Coming Prince, where he ended up working with the Royal Observatory in London. And with them, he was able to put together all of his records, all of the historical records and biblical evidences that point to the very precision and the breakdown in math of Daniel's prophecy. So, there's decrees and things like that are made by Artaxerxes, and the archaeology, it's just amazing how it lines up perfectly, literally perfectly. So anyway, Daniel sees this man, and although his buddies don't see this guy, they freak out and hide because somehow just the presence of this quote unquote man is affecting them. So they go and they hide. And this is kind of weird because it gives a solid indication of just how much control we as humans physically have over these other dimensions that we can't see. And here's a hint. Physically speaking, it's not much. But according to the Bible, it's our prayers, right? Our prayers, which I just spoke of previously, it's our prayers and the things that we do in supplication to God are pretty powerful in that realm. And I'll explain that in just a moment. But let's check out this guy. And as I'm describing him, I want you to sit there and think about how you would react, because I thought about how I would react and it wasn't pretty. I wanted to unthink it. Okay, so Daniel says, I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, a man clothed in linen with a belt of fine gold from Uphaz around his waist. His body was like beryl, his face like the appearance of lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and the sound of his words like the sound of a multitude. Guys, right out of the gate, not only is this guy dressed in Versace, but his body is like beryl, which in its purest form is colorless, but in certain cases, due to iron deposits and what have you, it can have every color in the rainbow. Like, just wow. Then we have a face like lightning. I'm thinking that looks like electricity, which no one at that time would have known what electricity was. Henceforth, he says lightning. Then we have eyes of fire. And not only do his arms and legs shine like bronze, but his voice sounds like the voices of a lot of people. So I imagine that to sound like when there's a whole bunch of people that are sitting in a concert, and the singer's on stage and he or she takes the mic away and is quiet, but everybody else is singing. It's almost like it's quiet yet still loud. I know. That doesn't make any sense. I get it. But neither does the dude that he's looking at, right? So, that's just weird. But okay, so here comes a dude. He's dressed in Versace. Body is either transparent or rainbow disco ball with arms and legs from Tiffany's. We've got 4th of July eyes minus mom's potato salad and the electric boogie for a face, right? Plus, he sounds like a full house at Pine Knob for a Journey singing, or for a concert with Journey singing Faithfully. Like, what do you do? I'd say that Daniel's reaction to this is pretty warranted. But you guys, not only that, he keeps it classy here, because I'm quite sure that not only would I have probably tossed my cookies, but I'm pretty sure that I would not have been able to control my mouth. And I'm just going to leave that right there. Okay. So he begins to shake. He passes out, and he finds that due to the vision he was given by Gabriel, he finds he can't talk because he can't breathe. And so in this biblical account, we see that angels can help us because he actually gives Daniel breath and strength. Okay. But then I have a question. Understanding what an extraterrestrial is, and clearly this guy is just that, why then, unless you're walking around and, you see a guy that looks just like this at Starbucks, then by all means, right? But last I checked, that's not a thing, in the human race, at least. So we can deduce that he's an ET. But why then, when we hear of accounts of people who've been abducted by aliens or what have you, they're not only negative experiences, but they're traumatizing. I actually have an in-depth theory on that, but I'm not going to get into that here. So we'll move on. All right. So Gabriel goes on to tell him that these are the things yet to come, i.e., it is a prophecy, and that he would have been there sooner, except he was fighting the, quote, Prince of Persia, excuse me, which is now modern day Iran, and that he tag teams one of the chief princes, which would be Michael, to take over so that he could come bring this message to Daniel. But here's the thing. It took him the same amount of time to bring that message to Daniel as Daniel had been praying and fasting. So my question is, what would have happened if Daniel stopped praying and fasting, would he still have received that message? Right? It's kind of crazy. But I feel like it's an indication of just how much influence our prayers and spirituality have in the unseen realm. In fact, I'm pretty sure that it means that we matter. Okay. What's in our hearts and our minds matters. By the way, a little side note here. The word for soul in the Greek is psyche, which means mind, right? So yeah, that needs to be a different podcast in its own, or a different episode in its own. But let's think about it like this. We know that we are electrical beings, right? And we're powered by energy. And we also know that our brains have bursts of energy that literally light up when we create synapses. So if the laws of physics say that energy can't be destroyed, only redirected, then what do you think happens with all of that energy when we die? All of that information in our brain, i.e. psyche, i.e. soul, doesn't die. So then where does it go when our body does die? It's a very interesting thing. The bottom line is that we can't have it both ways and say that math proves the laws of physics, so we believe that, but then think that those same laws don't apply to us, right? We can't have it both ways. It doesn't work that way. Speaking of death, Luke chapter 20, verse 36 says angels can't die. And also in Matthew chapter 25, verse 41 says there's a place set aside for the devil and his angels in hell. I found that to be kind of comforting. I hope you do too. But also, according to Hebrews chapter 12, verse 22, there are thousands and thousands upon angels. And if we go a step further, Revelation says that there are thousands upon thousands and 10,000 times 10,000 who encircle the elders and living creatures, which I'm just going to say that these living creatures are not something our eyes would be used to gazing upon, i.e. aliens. But I'll come back to that. So angels are also symbolized by the stars. And in general, they're called morning stars, which of course is associated with light. But they do have names and they can fly. But I find this interesting due to the fact that when we think of aliens in the conventional sense, we think of them among the stars. The Bible says that they left their positions of authority where they were dwelling in the heavens, okay, to procreate with humans, which also indicates that they too were created with a free will. They chose to leave. They chose to be turds. And so that indicates that they also have a free will. But what if these are the very things that we're seeing in the skies, right? Something else to consider is that they apparently have knowledge regarding their own fate, because in James chapter 2, verse 19, it says the devils believe in one God, that they shudder knowing he has a fate set aside for them. In fact, 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4 says that some of the evil ones are already chained up in what I'd like to call angel jail, which is actually Tartarus, which is another way of saying hell. There's a couple different types of hell, guys, just to let you know, but we don't need to get into that here. But they're basically awaiting their sentence. And last I checked, I don't think that they have bail options in Tartarus like we do in Illinois, right? And thank God for that. Am I right? Okay, anyway, that's a basic understanding. That's a basic understanding of angels, but there's something else, okay? They have classes per se. And if we look at the accounts many people have regarding aliens, we can see those same classes. In comparison to our conventional ideas of aliens, I feel like the Greys are simply a genetic hybrid. And I think that they are being used by the higher ranks to do the dirty work, i.e. reptilians, right? But moving on. We have these guys who are high ranking, and in particular, they lead God's praise and worship team up there somewhere, and they're called the seraph. This is a singular noun, and in Hebrew, this means fiery serpent. They look like reptilians with wings. In fact, 3 pairs of wings. Seraphim is the plural, and as a side note, in Hebrew, in order to have a plural of anything, you have to have 3 or more, not 2, as in English or what have you. But then we have the cherub, again, singular, whereas if it were plural, it's cherubim. And these guys have 4 different faces. So it's an ox, a man, an eagle, and a lion. And after God booted Adam and Eve out of the garden, he set one of these guys at the eastern gate of Eden to protect, quote, the way to the tree of life. Fun fact here, Jesus calls himself the way. Okay, and then we have the archangel. So one in particular would be Michael, and I'm not aware of how many there are here, because in 1 Thessalonians, it says that the Lord himself will come down with the voice of the archangel, which indicates that there's only one, right? However, we see in Daniel that Gabriel says one of the chief princes, which indicates that there's more. But I'll explain that in just a moment. But just as Zeus had multiple children that were considered one, like Charities or Muse, that's not to say that the archangel wasn't a club in its own right too, right? So what I know for sure, though, is that there's an abundance of things that I don't even bother to try to understand with regard to some of this stuff. But I am convinced that it's all relative somehow. Anyway, Ezekiel states that Satan was an anointed cherub, but I'm pretty sure that he found the price is wrong, Satan. And if you've never seen Happy Gilmore, you won't get that little joke, but that's okay. There is another word in there, but I'll keep that out for now. There are other types of angels too. Okay. But guys, these are even more bizarre. And that's just a whole nother episode. Because this is not a deep dive on angels. It's just right now to give you an understanding of how they are similar. However, if that's something you'd like to hear, let me know, because apparently there's nine classes. But anyway, so this is just to gain some understanding. And the other thing too, though, is that there seems to be a place where they dwell in common, right? And so that's something else to think about. And I find it very interesting that there's just all these similarities with each other. Like a seraph angel, like it seems like it's a reptilian alien that we think of today. They're awfully similar, dear friends, is what I'm saying. So then the next question is, how does this all relate to some of the things we're seeing that has become more mainstream from the government? Well, if you listen to the last episode, I spoke about the alphabet agencies and how the spiritual realm is making itself known and how it's intensifying more and more. I believe that aliens are a big factor here. I really feel that the media makes a thing, that if the media makes it a thing, then it's either a distraction of something bigger or whatever it is, or it will play a decent part in the upcoming scene. Okay. So if you didn't know not too long ago that there was a congressional hearing where some pretty credible guys came out with the help of Congressman Tim Burchett to testify about some of the crazy things going on in the military, which honestly, none of that stuff surprised me. probably much like it didn't really surprise many of you. But what did floor me was the 60% Black budget. 60% of the government budget is a secret. And that was very, that was amazing to me. I don't know why. I don't know why that surprised me. It just did. But this tells me that they have a ton of money that they're dedicating to things that they don't want us to know about. And if we give them the benefit of the doubt and say that it's only for agents of war, whether that's within the secrecy of it all, globally speaking or not, then we're in trouble, right? Like, but the question then at that point is why? Why all of a sudden come out about something everyone pretty much knew of already? In my opinion, is that it's part of a sinister plan to desensitize us, and all in an effort to normalize them, ultimately, so they can use this as a way to explain away what the Bible refers to as the rapture or the great harpazo. And that's basically when a bunch of pesky Christians disappear. Pesky according to the world. The world doesn't like Christians. And so the world then needs something besides the Bible to point the finger at, right? Because otherwise it confirms the Bible, and they don't want that. So I feel like this narrative would fit perfectly. Not only that, but a mass disappearance in this country, at least, let alone globally, would wreak havoc on the world, economically speaking, whereby setting the stage for the Antichrist to come and blah, blah. That's going to have to be a whole nother episode as well. But I'm working on it, so sit tight. But the stage is set here. And the government actually allowing the truth to be revealed is pretty out of character. So, yeah. In fact, I listened to Sean Ryan's episode, number 66, where he interviewed the Marine Michael Herrera. He was one of the guys that testified at the congressional hearing, and his testimony was just really weird to me. His story goes that they're selected, he and his buddies are selected to go to this particular site for humanitarian relief. And while they're there, they stumble upon this site where they see some crazy things, including a weird vehicle with different colored lights hovering over some sort of a platform. And he states that there are people loading containers onto this vehicle, and later would state that he was told by Dr. Stephen Greer that the contents of these containers were humans, which is weird. He also goes on to say that that they're captured by guys wearing all black, but they speak English, and these guys knew right where to look for their IDs, and they proceed to take them along with biometrics of their faces. And the fact that they knew where to look is what gave Herrera the idea that these guys were probably previously in the military, the U.S. military, or currently serving at the time. They go on to take their magazines, but let them keep their weapons, and they begin talking about how easy it would be to erase their existence. Okay. They tell them to turn around and face the hill, and then become restrained. And then they become restrained by a sling that only temporarily holds them. They then give them back their fully loaded magazines, except they tuck them brass side facing up in order to make loading their weapons just a little bit off of what they're used to, which would spend time, right? And that's it makes them not as efficient at loading their weapons. For example, our military is taught to insert their loaded magazines into a kit or a vest, brass side down or brass to the grass, per se, as it's the fastest way to load a magazine. He also notes that the technology these guys had looked like phones that we use today, where back then we were using things like Blackberries. So here's what I thought was weird. Okay, they let them go. All right, they let them go. Why? It just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense to me. He goes on to say, and I'll tell you why. He says that he and his buddies separately end up getting the type of interrogation one would get if they've seen something they're not supposed to see. An unidentified admiral basically states that if they don't keep their mouths shut, there would be major problems. And Herrera then goes on to say that he has these crazy encounters with black helos, black helicopters, and other scare tactics that he knows are directed at him. But guys, he goes on to say that he trusts the government and feels that they've got his back. They're, quote, taking care of me, he says. I mean, okay, but what I find to be really strange, and I'm just going to say this. How many names were in Epstein's logs again? And how many of them were government officials, right? Remember, you are who you keep company with, y'all. Just saying. If there is human trafficking going on, if there's an operation of human trafficking going on in the middle of the jungle somewhere using alien technology and you see it and immediately start receiving threats regarding it, I'm pretty sure that the government is involved, right? Somehow. And having your back is going to be their last concern. I know that might sound harsh, but that's just my feeling. So this guy goes through this whole ordeal some 15 years or so ago or whatever. His reputation, his career is threatened. Everything is not good. He has no peace about it, but he trusts the government. Now, I don't get it. It just doesn't make any sense to me. If you're on the radar, right, of the Black Ops, these guys can figure out what you had for breakfast this morning. They could probably figure out what you had for breakfast last week, let alone 2 years ago. I mean, they know when we sneeze, if they want to, right? If they want to, they know when we sneeze. We can't blink without these guys knowing about it. These people that are Black Ops are there for a reason. They're Black Ops for a reason. They're completely unknown to anybody. Yet he goes to Congressman Burchett and now he's protected. I mean, I hope so. For sure. I hope so. You know, and that could happen, but it just doesn't make any sense to me. I'd like to know what your guys' opinions are regarding that. My point is too, though, is if they wanted to really hide something, you know, they're getting all these threats. Don't say anything about this or else you're going to have problems, right? But if they really wanted to hide it, he and his buddies would have been out by that hill and they would have been erased. You know, they would have taken some lead and unalived and they would have just been erased. No problem. The fact that he came out with it and he's still alive tells me that the chances are they wanted this to come out. For crying out loud, you know, there's all these theories and whatever about JFK and they still won't come out about that, even though everybody knows what happened. It's crazy. But, you know, whatever. And I'm sure if what Dr. Greer said was true, you know, I mean, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I don't know. I don't think they really care, even if it were true. It's a byproduct of what I believe to be the core issue. I believe quite simply that they wanted to make sure that this story came out at the right time. And it's why they let them go. Yet they stayed just relevant enough in their lives by like following them and tormenting them, etc., so that ultimately they'd get sick of it and then, you know, possibly come forward about it. If they simply would have taken Herrera and his buddies at their word for it, that, you know, mum's the word, they won't say anything, and they didn't torment them, well, what do you think would have happened after 5 years, right? They would have fallen prey to the out of sight, out of mind aspect, and this would not have been a big thing enough to come forward with it because they would not have been annoyed enough with it. It would have died away, maybe to be left to this one time at band camp story, at some reunion barbecue or something, right? So what I'm saying is that, and this is just my own conjecture here, but it seems like this event, much like so many others, it was a setup. And it was a setup in the past to serve their agenda for the future, for today, because it makes a really great segue to normalizing the reality of aliens and their technology. Because we're going to see it, right? I mean, all we need to do is look at every president who's been assassinated. Okay, upon really investigating, we find that the circumstances are always shrouded in lies and mystery. Our black budget shadow government doesn't have a problem erasing people that they don't see playing a part of their agenda. To think that, and I don't want to sound mean, but to think that these guys would be any different, it just doesn't add up. So anyway, back to the UFOs for a moment. All right, so we have reports from all over the world of people having their own experiences with these things and the entities associated with them. And these reports are more often than not highly credible. The technology associated with them is something that we don't have, or at least as citizens, we don't know that we have it. Yet we know that they're there because we've seen them. They've been picked up on sonar and video, you name it. We've seen it. They've clocked in at, 6,000 miles per hour or faster. In fact, Michael Herrera states that he saw this thing take off and it was a blur. It was a total blur. He also stated, and this was weird, that it didn't disturb the trees and that the coconuts didn't budge. And so that's crazy, right? But it tells me that these things have to be interdimensional. Also, these reports make no mention of a sonic boom. I personally can attest to this. My husband and I, we saw something in the air one night. It came to a complete stop, sat there for a moment, and then took off in a 45-degree angle at such a speed. It was gone in the blink of an eye, but it was silent. Okay, we didn't hear anything, and it was so fast. It was so fast. But let's say we do have this technology. Okay, let's say we do have it. Then if that's the case, we still would have to be maneuvering them interdimensionally, because there's no way that our bodies could handle that kind of G-force, right? And then here's another thing I found interesting. Based on countless reports, these things carry a very high amount of radiation. And here we go. In an article by Live Science, they requested a database of documents consisting of more than 1,500 pages under the Freedom of Information Act. End quote. Encounters with UFOs have reportedly left Americans suffering from radiation burns, brain and nervous system damage, and even unaccounted for pregnancies, end quote. They go on to say, quote, UFO-related material from the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, i.e. ATIP, a secretive U.S. Department of Defense program that ran from 2007 to 2012, which I believe, you guys, was also when Herrera had his incident. I think it was 2008, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Despite never being classified as secret or top secret, the ATIP only became known to the public in 2017 when former program director Luis Elizondo resigned from the Pentagon. And when he resigned, he unveiled a ton of unidentified aircraft videos, and they were crazy. So that was from Live Science. That was an article from Live Science. Anyway, there are tons of reports, and most of them indicate that there's an amount of radiation that emits when it's either landing or when it's hovering, and it'll kill the grass around it. Nothing will grow there anymore. People who have touched it end up being harmed somehow. And so my point here is that no doubt radiation seems to be a thing, right? Which brings me to our next guest, the Shroud of Turin. Okay, so I know you're probably going to say, what does this have to do with aliens and UFOs? But just bear with me. It ties in. The Shroud of Turin, it's a topic of debate, but it's the most cross-disciplinary studied relic in history. The claims are that it's the burial shroud that Jesus was wrapped in after he was crucified and then placed in Joseph of Arimathea's tomb. Skeptics point to carbon dating and a letter written by Pierre d'Arcis, probably not pronouncing that right, but you get it, in 1389, where he states that he painted the image on the shroud. But we have the science that proves that that image is not painted. Okay. And it's proven. They also say that the scriptures don't talk about it, but that too is false. In five, it's there at least 5 different times, and the word used is clothes. However, the Greek word is othonion, which means linen strips. It's othonion or othonion, and that means linen strips or linen wrappings. Basically every rebuttal that can be addressed has been. Side note, Jesus being buried in good old Jojo's tomb was a prophecy that was fulfilled. The prophecy was foretold in Isaiah 53, verse 9, saying, "And he made his grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, because he had done no violence, neither was there any deceit in his mouth." So we know that Jesus was set between 2 thieves, and Joseph was a rich guy, according to Matthew 27, verse 57. He was a Pharisee, and the Pharisees had some pretty strict laws to follow regarding their death. The word of the day would be defilement in that case, but they weren't allowed to come in contact with dead bodies, or blood or anything like that. Like, it was really very, it was very, very strict. And so giving his tomb up to a dead person would have been a huge no-no. Yet he did it anyway. He gave it up to Jesus intentionally, and on a holy day at that. It was Passover. That was a high holy day. But to ask why then is to go beyond the idea that he believed Jesus was the Messiah. If we take that aspect away, the scripture says because he wasn't violent and he spoke nothing but truth, right? In which case, that would have been the reason he believed Jesus was the Messiah, because Jesus said he was the Messiah and there was no deceit in him. See the circle there? There's a circle. Also, fun fact, Jesus wasn't buried on a Friday. I won't get into that here, but there's way more evidence that speaks to a Thursday crucifixion. And just track with me here. I'm getting to the thing. Okay. Just stick it out. But here we have a holy man, a Pharisee, giving up his tomb to a dead man, that his whole congregation and anyone not connected to Jesus sees it as just that. He's a dead man. So back then, the Sanhedrin, if they condemned someone to death, then it was their responsibility for the burial of that person. And so Joseph does just this. He goes to Pontius Pilate. He asks for permission to get the body. Pontius gives it to him. But Joseph goes a great step further, along with another Pharisee named Nicodemus. And they actually wrap him in this shroud of linen, this linen wrapping. And they do it according to Jewish law. By the way, this shroud would have been really, really expensive. And it's something that would have been reserved for the Pharisees, who were the rabbis per se of that time. Basically, it wasn't an easy thing to come by. The Bible says that these guys were disciples of Jesus, which would have been really dangerous back then. So these very acts show their belief and their devotion to him. Anyway, back to the shroud. Okay, so let's see. People of all kinds of professional disciplines have been looking at this thing. And some of these people are rocket scientists and weapons specialists, which that's crazy to me, right? Why are rocket scientists and weapons specialists studying this thing? Why is that happening? I think I know why. But there's, a 14-foot piece of linen, and so many people are captivated with it. They've used every resource that we have, every tool possible that we have at our disposal to figure out how this image got on this piece of linen, and they just can't figure it out. Except there's one answer, okay, and it's highly plausible. But in short, the thing is that whoever was wrapped in this shroud took a selfie. It's an image of what looks to be like a photographically sensitive negative on a non-photographically sensitive material. Like he took a selfie. What's also weird is that the image can't be seen close up. You have to stand several feet away from it in order for it to come into view. And it's also super resilient. It's been through 3 fires and soaked by water at least twice. And when they've used fluorescence to study it, they could see where the water illuminated, where it had touched, but the water didn't touch the image. So the water didn't illuminate on the image. Like, that's really very strange, and it goes against physics as we know it. But I digress. The bottom line is I want to know how that image got there. So I took a deep dive here, and the results were really cool. First, I'd like to dispel the thinking that this is just a Catholic thing, because it's not. It was actually held by the House of Savoy, which was a monarchy in Italy, and they possessed it until the Middle Ages. Ultimately, it was passed over to the Pope when he died. So the Shroud of Turin it's Shroud of Turin Research Project Group, which the acronym for it is STIRP. And they end up sending 26 American scientists to Turin to perform these non-destructive experiments on the shroud for a total of 120 hours. It included light and electron microscopy, photography, obviously, various wavelengths, front and back, UV spectrophotometry of fluorescence. Wow. X-ray fluorescence and absorption radiography, thermal photography, mass spectrography, laser microprobe, spectrography, you get it. And they attempted to alter the color on the fibers using acids, bases, oxidants, reductants, and organic chemicals. Basically wanted to make sure that the image was not painted on. Okay. Some scientists speculate that this image was captured by a bolt of light somehow. But how much light would it take to create this thing? They're saying that it would have had to take 6.4 gigawatts to make it happen. And yeah, that's a lot of power. Side note, one of the original guys on the STIRP team was a guy named Ray Rogers. He was a chemist and a total skeptic, claiming that all he needed was 20 minutes and he could prove this thing was a hoax. Well, he couldn't prove it, and instead became somewhat of a, quote, keeper, per se, of the shroud, a protector, if you will, and he died that way. He was definitely a believer in it. But there are a few things that we do know for sure. The composition of the cloth is consistent with 1st century, and this is how we know this. This is contrary to the people that want to continue to lean on the carbon dating, because they have found pollen from plants that's native to Israel, and among several other things, the dimensions in the weave pattern are indicative of the burial cloth consistent with Jewish law and customs from the 1st century. They also found soil mixed with blood that's native to Israel. And we know that there were Roman coins on his eyes. They were actually minted by Pontius Pilate in 29 AD. So I'd say that's a pretty good indication of a couple of things. Number one, this thing is really old. Number two, it's from Judea. And number three, whoever was buried in it was a Jew. We also know that there's blood stains on it. And this is interesting because they haven't decayed. These stains are still like red. And this is odd, but there's an explanation for this. It turns out that when the human body goes through extreme trauma, it releases a high content of bilirubin. And this is responsible for why the blood remains red over time and it doesn't turn dark brown. We also know that the plasma around the stains were revealed under UV light, and the blood type of this person is a rare AB positive. This is a universal donor with a really rare blood type. And just to put this into perspective, only 3.4% of the US population is AB positive. Another thing that we can see is that by looking at the bloodstains, it's clear that the person was in fact crucified. This person had wounds in his wrists, as well as his feet. And it also shows numerous puncture wounds on his head and scalp that match the sudarium of Oviedo, which is considered to be the, quote, other shroud per se. This is a small piece of linen that would have been over his face. And this linen has been held in Spain since the 7th century. But it also busts the carbon dating, because saying that the shroud was from the 13th or 14th century, because both the shroud and the so the shroud would be the Sudarium Christi, and that's the Shroud of Turin, and then the smaller one, the Oviedo, Sudarium Oviedo would be the smaller piece. They match with the blood markings, and they match in over 100 points of blood contact. And that indicates it had to have touched the same face as the shroud itself, but also the blood type matches on both. So I think the odds there are pretty good that they're the same. But that's the reason why it's important, because some scientists want to do the carbon dating, and they want it to be the 13th or 14th century, and it's just not. The cloth matches in too many ways, and they can positively date that back to the 1st century. So that's busted. And let's see. So there's a few things that we know it's definitely not. How did this image get there, right? We know what we can see is that this man has a deviated septum, swelling over both eyebrows and below his right eye, as well as his left cheek and his left side of his chin. We see the puncture wounds on his head that were indicative of a Roman crown, which was actually shaped more like a cap, not the crown we're used to seeing depicted in paintings and what have you. Also, according to this image, his body has 370 wounds minimum. Guys, that's a conservative number. Some people would say that it's closer to 600 or even 700. He had over 120 lashes on his back that matched that of a Roman legionnaire's flogger. So again, this shatters the idea that it was a fake done in the Middle Ages. One wound in particular was a stab wound in the chest cavity that matches that of a Roman legionnaire's spear, and what appears to be left behind was blood and water. Beatings, scourges, and crucifixion were not unique to people back then, but what this person endured was unique in the manner of which he was crucified. We also know that this image is only on the very surface of the fibers, which indicates that it underwent a rapid dehydration. And then there's something else. It seems as though the hands are moving. Okay, so if you can picture a person running across the finish line and there's a strobe of pictures being taken very, very quickly, you can start to see the previous actions ever so slightly in different positions, in different frames. It's called strobophotophotogenic, or something like that. I did have that in my head, and now it's not in my head, but I am going to go ahead and I will post like a picture on my Facebook page, and hopefully that'll give you a good idea of what I'm talking about here. But it looks like the hands are moving. It's very strange. But yeah, I'll go ahead and post a picture. And also, okay, it's got depth. This image has depth. It's got 3D dimensionality. For instance, when you can see space like under his chin, and like he doesn't have an Adam's apple. You can see space there, but I'm going to come back to that. So then the question is how? How did that image get there? Well, here's what the scientists have been able to confirm. And by all means, go and take a look at this stuff. It's pretty crazy. But they've confirmed that it's not paint. It's not a vapor, because not only could the blood be tested, but there's nothing penetrating beyond the very surface of the cloth, and vapors don't just stop. It can't be heat radiation, because there would be nothing left of it. It would have been vaporized. And so the only possible explanation is light radiation. But it would have had to be light alone, no heat. So if this is the case, this is what would have been required. It would take 6 to 8 billion watts of light energy, and that's equivalent to 500,000 searchlights coming out of this body. That makes this a really crazy dead body. Just saying. The kind of light energy to create this image would have had to be absent of heat and happen such a short amount of time. The burst would have to be 1/40 billionth of a second of a directional vacuum ultraviolet radiation beam with the intensity of several billion watts. Guys, that's a ton of power packed into a burst of light at a super high frequency in a really short amount of time. Like my brain is like, I can't comprehend that. So the question is now, is that possible? Is that plausible? Right? Well, it turns out that there was a study done by a dude named Paolo Di Lazzaro. And he and his team used an ultraviolet vacuum radiation ARF laser and followed those very specs. So short bursts at 1/40th billion of a second, and were indeed able to create a negative photosensitive image on a non-photosensitive linen cloth, which is crazy to me. But let's go back to the three-dimensionality of the image. So now we know light radiation is definitely possible, right? If this is what is responsible for the image, How was the spatial dimension captured? Why does it have such intense 3D dimensions? Well, the only explanation is something called mechanical transparency. Basically means he disappeared. But in order for this to take place, it would require the shroud to penetrate the body at least 3/16 of an inch. So the only way that this could have happened is if the shroud passed through the body, okay, at the same exact time that this burst of light happened. That's crazy to me. In other words, this guy would have had to become transparent like a ghost, right, at the very moment of this burst of light. So now I have to ask, is there another explanation for this? Well, I'm going to just tell you, if there is, I couldn't find it. If you have an explanation or a theory, by all means, bring it on, because I'm curious. End Times Now with Bree at did I get that right? End Times Now with Bree at protonmail.com. Yes, thank you. But what does all this stuff have to do with each other, right? What does the shroud have to do with aliens and UFOs and whatever? Okay, well, first we have to address the fact that all of the evidence regarding the Shroud of Turin, from its origin to the DNA to the image itself and how it got there, are identical to the accounts given by John's Gospel in chapter 19. We have to address this, right? And according to the Bible, how it corresponds with history, the crucifixion of Jesus was unique in that he went through an incredible amount of torture, so much so that the amount of torture in and of itself, along with the amount of blood loss, is probably what is responsible for him dying so quickly on the cross. Most people didn't die that fast, and so the soldiers would break their legs and make them die faster because they wouldn't be able to hold themselves up, so they would essentially die of asphyxiation. But according to the biblical account, Jesus didn't have any broken legs, making him the sufficient candidate for ultimate sacrifice for the Passover lamb. And the image on the shroud shows that the bones were completely intact. And yet, according to the biblical account of this event, his neighbors to the right and the left were still alive, and therefore they suffered broken legs. This is very unique. In fact, Jody Magnus, an archaeologist of North Carolina, also an expert in the field of Judeo-Christian archaeology, states that the Gospels get it right. Quote, "The Gospels get it right when you study the death of Jesus." End quote. By the way, she's an atheist, so there's no bias there. She's an expert in her field, and that's what she had to say about it. But in order to find out just how the shroud and UFOs have a connection, we have to ask this question. Is this, the image on the shroud, is that really Jesus Christ? Because if we can, look at the evidence of the shroud and say, okay, that makes sense, then we have to ask, is that really Jesus Christ? It matches up with the accounts in John, right? So then we have to ask, is it him? Well, there's one last piece of evidence, and this comes from a Paris-based institute called the International Center of Studies for the Shroud of Turin, where one Dr. Maria Grazia Ciliato, I'm sure I butchered that, one of the world's foremost experts on the shroud, and her team load the entire image, into a program, divide it into tens of thousands of squares, where then they're given an optical density and then transferred onto a highly advanced visualization program. And under the chin of the man in the image, they start to see some letters appear, and it's written in Latin and in Greek. And she goes on to confirm that it does in fact say Jesus Nazarene. So here's the thing, guys. I've looked for other possibilities, other possible explanations, and I can't find one. And so if this is how that image came into play using radiation, then we have to look at what is the connection between that and UFOs, right? Okay. Here's the thing. It's hard to ignore that the science on the shroud is very convincing, but if it's true, then it actually gives more weight to my theory that connects the two. For example, and just track with me here, but if we come to the conclusion that what we're seeing with regard to UFOs is supernatural and interdimensional, and we also come to the conclusion that if this shroud is the image of Jesus Christ and his body becomes supernaturally resurrected, and that is also interdimensional, then the one thing that they both have in common is radiation. Okay? Except one is harmful, creates burns, illness, brain damage, and then neurological and nerve damage, while the other is either at the very least instrumental in imprinting an image on a shroud of a man whose wounds match the biblical account of Jesus Christ's crucifixion, or this radiation is instrumental in imprinting an image of Jesus Christ at the moment he's resurrected back to life, or, to take it a step further, instrumental in his resurrection, period. So let's strip away some things here. If that image is not Jesus and all of the evidence is pointing to that, like the origin of the shroud, the uniqueness of the crucifixion, the lack of the broken legs, his name, like take it all out of the equation, then what we're left with is a supernatural event in which a random dead person suddenly illuminates himself and becomes mechanically transparent for no reason other than to imprint a 3D selfie of himself on a shroud. And that doesn't make any sense to me. Okay. So as crazy as it sounds, it makes more sense to me to follow the evidence that says a man known to bring people back from the dead was buried in this shroud, supernaturally illuminates with a radioactive laser beam, and then at the very moment he comes back to life in order to fulfill prophecy and save mankind. That sounds more plausible. I know that sounds crazy, but it sounds more plausible. So if we go with that, then is this possible that the radiation is an interdimensional element? Is it possible that when God said, "Let there be light," what flowed from that statement was some type of light that is associated with the shroud? It's like a life-giving light. I mean, both God and Jesus are referred to as being a light, and in some cases so bright that none could even gaze upon it. And we also see that Satan acts as an angel of light. Is it possible that the radiation we see here with regard to Satan was once a good type of light radiation, whereas after he and his cohorts took the dive out of heaven, their radioactive light became harmful? If aliens and their technology are actually fallen angels and their technology, right, then a change in how their radiation would go from good to bad actually makes sense. The Bible says that once this war between good and evil is over for good, that there will be no need for the sun any longer. It will be his light that shines. Revelation chapter 22, verse 5 says, "And there shall be no night there, and they need no candle, neither light of the sun, for the Lord God giveth them light, and shall reign forever and ever." That being said, when you go into the account for Genesis, you see that the sun wasn't created before the plants, which is interesting. Maybe it's because all they needed was his light. I don't know. What do you guys think about this? Right? This is pretty crazy. If the Shroud of Turin is in fact an image of Jesus Christ, and they've been able to prove how it got there then there's a big reason to believe that maybe, the two are connected, in that heaven has radiation. I don't know. It's a crazy thing to think about. And so I'm curious to know what you guys think about this. I appreciate you guys sticking it out today. I know that it was a lot, but I hope that it opened your mind to the possibility that what they want us to believe might not be the truth, and it might actually have an explanation. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please, if anyone has anything to add, reach out to me. Lastly, if you or anyone you know has any questions about the scientific, archaeological, and mathematical reasons why we can believe what the Bible says, please don't hesitate to reach out. Or even if you just have prayer requests, even if they're simply just, hey, please pray for me, don't hesitate to email me. I have some pretty good prayer warriors on my team. Y'all know who you are. My email, again, endtimesnowwithbrie@protonmail.com. And guys, if he left us this playbook, and if it's true, then consider what it says without belief that Jesus is a savior for us in the midst of all this crazy, that we are destined to an irreversible eternity of torment. And that alone makes it worth investigating. But also the possibility that he loves us so much that he would endure the things he did so that he could bring us back home to him. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and end this podcast with today's prophecy scripture. It is Matthew chapter 24, verse 29. And the hint there is that it has not happened yet, but it will. Until next time, guys, this is Brianna signing off, and we'll see you soon. God bless.